Okay, welcome everyone. We're going to wait a few more minutes as people continue to join. So while we do, I thought we could get to know our panelists a little bit and start with a fun icebreaker question, which is, what is your favorite form of self-care? Lauren, why don't we start with you?
So my little form of self-care is I have chocolate every day, and I might have chocolate chips on my desk right now, not gonna lie. My bigger form of self-care is I do try to exercise every morning, and it goes hand in hand with eating chocolate every day.
Lauren, you're next on my screen. So what is your favorite form of self-care?
One of my favorite forms of self-care is prioritizing my sleep. So ensuring whatever I need to do to get to bed at a reasonable time, whether that's shutting down early, taking a bath, in order to allow myself to get a full night's sleep so I can feel rested and rejuvenated in the morning.
I love it. I can relate to both of you. Nick, what do you do?
Do you know, I wish I could say mine was exercise, but I have such an inverted relationship with exercise. But I think when I have a chocolate bar, I get so excited before it. I love it during it. And then afterwards, I invariably kind of have a degree of self-loathing. And with exercise, it's kind of the opposite way around, that before the exercise, I loathe it. During it, I kind of humor it. And afterwards, I feel great. So I don't count exercises, although I do it. I probably would say gardening. I love gardening. There's so much in it that kind of speaks to me. I just find being in nature really good for my well-being. And also, I think there's something about the lack of predictability in it, which is a valuable lesson to me. And sometimes I try and be too much of a perfectionist, but no matter how many times you try, you just can't persuade a plant to grow exactly as you want. So I always take a lot away from that.
I love that. And I think many would argue that gardening is a form of exercise. So I think we're all on the same page, and mine is very similar. I went on a run this morning, and that's always my decompression time. It's how I keep my mind clear, and I also prepare for moments like this when we have a great conversation planned. So I think we have most people joined by now. Let's just jump into it. Before we start, though, I want to let everyone know what to expect over the course of the next hour. We are going to start with a really quick overview of Uber for Business, because the conversations that we have been having with thousands of companies over the last year and a half in terms of how they've been facing this pandemic and the organizational changes that they're going through has really led us to find that wellness in the workplace and really mental health is top of mind for organizations. And so that led us to bring this great group of panelists together. And we're going to spend most of our time today in a fireside chat, having just kind of an open conversation about mental health, what that means for organizations, and specifically what that means for employees in the workplace. So there is a Q&A button at the bottom of everyone's screen. Feel free at any point to type in a question. We're going to save time at the end of the session to try to address as many as we can. So if we just start with Uber for Business, we 6 years ago began as a business travel platform, and we have really evolved as Uber services have expanded. So today we are offering global rides, food delivery, local delivery to 150,000 companies across 26 countries. But this means that over the last year and a half, we've been having conversations with companies from small to enterprises across a lot of different industries, really trying to understand how they've been managing the pandemic. Because overnight, if we think back to March of 2019, business travel halted. And we learned a ton, not just about our customers, but about our platform. They started using our platform in so many different ways. And so many of our solutions became key selling points. So whether it was getting essential workers where they needed to go, feeding them while they were on the road, employee perks, boosting morale, it was really clear that there was a newfound focus on employee wellness and well-being. And that has really led us to have conversations on topics like the one we're going to jump into today, because wellness at the workplace is really something that every organization is tackling and thinking about. So today we're going to look at the impact that COVID-19 has had on both mental and physical health across the globe, and how companies now are defining what it means to be well in the workplace and really provide holistic care to their employees. And the conversation is starting to change. A lot of individuals and organizations are a lot more open to the conversation. And that's leading employers to really thinking about what it means to provide holistic care for their employees. And I think everyone on our panel today has a lot of expertise and great insight into this topic. So before we jump in, I want everyone to introduce themselves, and I will start. I am Michelle Lisowski. I run B2B Marketing here at Uber, and that covers not just Uber for Business, but also Uber Freight and the merchant side of our Uber Eats platform. So I spend a lot of time talking to companies across industries and thinking about how Uber can help support them, especially in the wake of this pandemic. And facilitating conversations like this one, addressing topics like mental health, is not just a passion. It is critical to finding and learning new ways that we can move businesses forward. So let's start with Lauren. We'll go in order of the pictures on the screen. Why don't you share a little bit more about your background?
Sure. Hi, my name is Lauren Hooper, and I'm part of the customer success team at Lyra Health. And as part of my responsibilities, I have the privilege and the honor of guiding customers through implementing and using our program, as well as helping create strategies around destigmatizing mental health in the workplace. So I have the privilege of working with many companies, large and small, and really understanding on what makes and what's important to them in terms of prioritizing their mental health strategy and really creating an anti-stigma campaign so people can really talk about mental health and feel confident in using resources and benefits.
Nick, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, very happy to. Hi, I'm Nick. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Unmind, and I'm a clinical psychologist by background. I spent most of my life working in mental health services in the UK, both the charity and academic and public health sector. And over that time, saw a lot of great clinical practice, but became frustrated that I didn't meet people early enough in their journey towards mental ill health, and also that all of my time and energy was focused on reactive healthcare, which very much resembles what we see in society at large. And actually what we know is that prevention is better than cure. So 5 years ago, I left the NHS, National Health Service in the UK, to co-found Unmind. And Unmind is a workplace mental health platform that focuses on prevention with mental health, empowering employees to look after their mental health using our digital platform. And I'm really excited about our conversation today.
Thanks, Laura.
Yeah, I am Laura Faith, and I work here at Uber with Michelle. I am the Senior Director of People Experience and Operations, and I lead a team that does everything from really designing the vision of what we want our Uber employee experience to be, based on deeply understanding our employees and their needs, all the way through enabling all of HR to help meet those needs that employees have, to actually owning the team. We call it our operations team, but that is really working on a day-to-day basis, one-on-one with employees to meet those needs through delivering those services that they need.
Great. So with that, let's jump in. The impact of COVID on well-being. And whether we have our own personal stories or we've seen the effect on people we love, we all have experiences with how COVID-19 has impacted mental health. Whether we found ourselves suddenly to be at-home teachers or caregivers to someone who's immunocompromised, or in complete social isolation because we were living alone, this pandemic has had a broad impact. And prior to the pandemic, the Kaiser Family Foundation consistently found that 1 in 10 adults reported experiencing some type of anxiety or depressive disorder. When that same study was redone in February of this year, about a year into the pandemic, the number had jumped to 4 in 10. Over 40% of adults are experiencing some type of anxiety or depression. And that number just increases if you are women with children, an essential worker, based on race or ethnicity, and it also increases the younger you are. So we're seeing more people seek mental health care, but the burnout rates are really high. And Lauren, I think, at Lyra, you have insight into a lot of these trends. I thought we could start with you and share a little bit about what you're seeing.
Yeah, so in the beginning of Q3 in 2020, we began asking clients 2 COVID-related questions as part of the outcomes assessment to date. And so far, we've collected 175,000 responses. And really what we found after asking, how difficult has the COVID-19 pandemic made it been for you to function in your life? And we found that 48% felt that they had difficulty functioning due to COVID-19. And we also found 31% experienced a great deal of stress due to COVID-19 alone. So we're really seeing that these numbers and COVID-19 is really affecting our members' mental wellness and mental well-being. And we really need to focus on, getting the right tools and support and clinical access for them to really start to make change and start to feel better. Because we know that there's a really long tail to this pandemic and it's not going away anytime soon. And really being able to show up and support our members where they need it most.
Yeah, and Laura, you've talked about something that I thought was really interesting, coined the Great Resignation. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I think, burnout really is showing up in people's behaviors in terms of what they're doing, what they're deciding to do as it comes to employment. There's been a lot of articles about the Great Resignation, which is, I think people are really reflecting on, what do I have control over that can make my life better right now? And what are some decisions that I can make? And during a time like COVID, where a lot of us are stuck at home, our social options are limited, one thing that you can change is you can change your job. You can really reflect on, is how I'm spending my day to day making me happy? Is it making me feel better? Does it fit in the rest of my life? And if not, can I make a change? And we're seeing that across many different industries. We're seeing across many different employers. And I think it's something that we all need to recognize as like, hey, it reflects a greater trend of people saying, hey, I need to have holistic experience between work and my personal life.
That's great. Nick, anything you want to add here?
I just think it's interesting, isn't it? Because over this period, there have been two wider macro trends, and I think the first is that, to Lauren's point, that the scale of the problem that we faced pre-pandemic has actually got bigger as a result of the pandemic. Because if you think about all of the ways in which the pandemic has impacted on somebody's life, it creates increased risk factors as to why our mental health might be negatively impacted. But I think the second macro trend is probably more hopeful and positive, which is that actually the topic of conversation around mental health has increased in volume. And more people are speaking about it than ever before, and that's helping to normalize the conversation. And that presents an incredible opportunity to take the stigma away. And to help people get to the right care at the right time. So I think there is a positive trend to be found there amongst a negative trend, but that gives me hope for the topic.
Yeah, and I definitely want to come back to that notion of opening up the conversation, because I think it's such an important part of how organizations are starting to tackle this and think about it. So if we start to think about COVID as the backdrop, wellness in the workplace is really top of mind for organizations. And over 90% are concerned about increasing kind of mental costs going into 2022 and just the long-term effects of kind of mental health and employee well-being. And this is really not just a financial burden for organizations. We know that employee wellness, it equates to organizational success. Uncertainty, stress, this has negative impacts across the board, from talent retention to productivity to innovation. But studies also show that resilience in employees is a really important buffer and helps organizations navigate some of these more turbulent times. But that really then leads to the question of, what does it look like? What does wellness in the workplace look like? And Nick, you have talked about kind of how there's no longer this separation between kind of work and the home, but also how the level of diversity is increasing for individuals. Can you dig into that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I definitely I came into lockdown. I'm not at home today, but I came into lockdown with a lot of anxiety about a child walking in, or a dog barking, or worse still, and this has happened, my children walking naked in the background somewhere. And then towards the end of lockdown, I'm now I don't even notice it. I mean, there could be like a total chaotic scene in the background. I think we've just come to accept that. So I think for some workers, that work-life boundary has become a little bit easier. But of course, that doesn't apply to everyone. But I think more broadly, what's happened is that we've learned to recognize the diversity of our lives and how different we all are, be that where we live, be that who we live with, be that whether we're a carer or a support of someone. And really that speaks to the fact that our mental health is often seen as like a separate entity to the rest of our lives, but of course it's not. Our mental health is made up of our biological life, so our age, our gender, our disease status, our nutrition, our sleep. It's made up of our psychological life, that's our personalities, it's the beliefs we hold about the world around us, how much psychological safety we perceive there to be, how much control we sense we have. And of course, it's made up of our social life, which is our friendship group, our family, our finances, and of course, our workplace. So what we know is those three areas of our lives uniquely position us on the spectrum of mental health. And no two of us have exactly the same set of scenarios that determine what our mental health looks like. And I think what we're realizing ever more in the workplace, and just getting more and more focus, is that the environment of the workplace can have a very big impact on and determinant on somebody's mental health. And I think it's easy to conceptualize that as in the world of plants, to go back to my gardening kind of love earlier on. Like if you take a seed and that seed is put in arid soil with no sunlight and no nutrition and no water, the seed will not make a very good plant. If you take a seed, assuming it's the right type of plant, of course, if you take that same seed and you put it in the perfect moist soil with the right nutrients, the right amount of sunlight, it will grow into a beautiful plant. Now, obviously, human beings are somewhat more complicated than seeds, but the basic premise is actually the same, that the environment and the circumstances that individual finds himself in will determine how they are to an extent. And I think that's what's so exciting for workplace mental health, is workplaces have the opportunity to be that perfect soil, to be that right amount of light, to help their people flourish.
And yeah, certainly. And I think the definition of the workplace is changing. And Laura, I know we think a lot about that. How are you approaching this?
Yeah, I think things that's been interesting in my time in HR is, we used to think of work was separate. It happened in an office, in a factory, wherever you got in your car and you drove to and you went to work or took a bus or transported to. That has been changing over the last 30 years, but COVID has absolutely accelerated that. We're all of a sudden starting in around March 2020 for most US companies in our space, people had to start working from home, right? That was the easiest way to keep it. And to be fair, not everybody had the luxury of working from home, but a lot of people did. And so I think it's really important to recognize that what we think of as workplace is very diverse. It can be an employee that is sitting in their living room on a laptop with children in the background, trying to focus on getting something done. Also be an employee that has to go into a workplace during a pandemic where they're worried about their health and their safety and taking it to their family. And so I think it's really important for us as employers to really think through, how does work integrate with our employees' lives, and how do we meet them where they are so that we can support them in whatever that looks like.
And does this change when we start thinking about hybrid environments where some people are at home and some people are in the office?
It doesn't change. It becomes the new norm. And that's something that we are having to work through now, which is we don't actually know what the future looks like, right? We've all been living in this state where we're like, oh, when COVID goes away, the work will go back to normal. And I think if the last 2 years have taught us anything, the world isn't ever going to go back to what it really looked like. So as an organization, you have to think through, how do we create, again, that space where it is for our employees, give them the flexibility they need, give them the tools that they need to create a workspace where they can do their best work, whether it is in the office sometimes, at home all the time, whether that is in a retail footprint because they have to interact one-on-one with their customers. The workplace will never look the same like it did even 2 years ago.
I want to put you all on the spot and see if you have any tips. One thing that I know I and many people struggled with as we started trying to work from our homes and figure out what is our space, whether it's away from our children or with, a backdrop that might not show the messiness of our lives. What tips do you have for people working at home who are trying to kind of create that space within their lives to try to show up in a really professional way?
I'm happy to go first. I've actually been working from home for almost 4 years now, so I feel like I had a little bit of a head start. And I think the first thing you have to understand is what Nick said, which is you can't separate your personal life from your professional life, and that's okay. And in fact, I think that you should embrace it, because your personal life is part of who you are. And on any given day, you're going to show up as that person. And you may have, like, I've got my kids in the background. In any given point in time, I might have a dog barking in the background. And that's just part of who I am. And I've learned to focus and to stay focused on the people I'm talking to on my screen at any given point in time. But accept that about yourselves, and then accept that about your coworkers, right? This is the real world, and we're all doing the very best that we can, and we don't have to be perfect.
I can go. So a few things. The first thing for me, being a working mom and having 2 kiddos at home through the pandemic, is do your best. It's not easy, but to drop the guilt. It can really swallow you up. So however you need to do that, talk with a mental health professional, your friends, your community. It's just so important to kind of release that as much as you can, because when those little faces are staring at you and you have to go back to your computer, it really pulls on the heartstrings. And then I'll share a quick story. The other day, my little girl, she's 9, she was playing in her room with one of her friends. And she was like, well, what does your mommy do? And she says, oh, she works for Lyra. She helps people get access to therapy quickly. And I just felt so proud of her, because she just really, I really felt like she learned something through the pandemic. And I was so proud for her be able to really explain that and really had a good understanding of what I do. And I don't know, it was just a really proud moment as a mom to be able to hear her talk about my passion and my work like that. So find those silver linings where you can, and celebrate those wins, because they'll really fill your bucket.
I love that. I'm pretty certain my kids would still say I work on the computer, and they're the same age. So that's great progress. Let's jump into this next section, because it's really about talking about it. And Nick, you said this earlier, that the conversation around mental health is evolving and people are a lot more open to talking about it. And this has led to really positive change. There's certainly a it's a hard word, destigmatization of the topic. But something else you shared is that you really have to own it every day, and that we really have to embrace positive mental health as well. And I'd love to dig into that more and really understand what it looks like for employees and for companies.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's not that long ago that I remember 2 types of conversations. The first was mental health advocates saying, I wish there was a senior leader who would speak openly about mental health. And the second one was people saying, oh, I know someone with mental health. Those are the 2 things I used to hear a couple of years ago. And the first one really speaks to the fact that there was a period when it was very difficult for people to speak openly about experiences of mental illness. And I think what we've seen over the past 5 or so years is that there have been some incredibly courageous stories of leaders coming out and sharing very personal stories, which really helped to normalize the topic. The second one speaks to the fact that for many people a few years ago, when they heard the term mental health, they just thought about mental ill health. And I still think that happens more today than people acknowledge, actually, or realize. And the fact is, mental health is different to mental ill health. They are different things. Mental ill health is illness that you have in relation to your mental health. And there are different diagnostic or clinical frameworks that help to categorize and diagnose those. So very dominantly in the US, the American Psychiatric Association, the DSM-5 is a very, very important document, kind of book that classifies all mental illnesses known to modern science. But the big news story here is that you actually are born with mental health and you die with mental health. So every single moment that you are alive, you have mental health. Every human being who has ever lived has had mental health for their entire life. Every human being who will ever live will have mental health for their entire life. Every human being who is alive right now, right this very second, has mental health right this second. This is not a problem space topic. This is not just about problems. This is about your mental health in the same way right now we all have physical health, in the same way right now we all have dental health. But the big difference in our societies today is that we teach our children from the age of 1 to brush their teeth twice a day. You know, albeit with very limited success in my family. But we do teach people to brush their teeth, even in the height of lockdown. In the UK, at least, and I believe around the world, we've been allowed to leave our houses to exercise because we know that looking after our physical health can keep us well, can prevent problems from occurring. Now, there's a stark contrast to how we position topics of dental health and physical health in the world. For most people, when they see a dental product, they'll see a picture of perfect shiny teeth. That's kind of the association people have. You think about teeth, you think about a beautiful toothpaste packet with a perfect set of teeth on it. Even in the UK, where I know our dental reputation is not quite as good as other parts of the world, that's still the case. But with physical health, you can't buy a pair of, say, running shoes without a picture of an athlete wearing them to model them. And that really speaks to how we are so aspirational around physical and dental health. But mental health, and this is changing, but the majority of images, if you look up on a Google search, are kind of black and white images, someone holding their head in their hands. Now, in all my clinical years, I've never met anyone in black and white. So I don't know at what point we decided to take away the image from photographs of people with mental illnesses anyway. I've met people who have a diagnosis of schizophrenia who have incredible moments of clarity of thought. I've met people who are suicidal who can laugh. I've met people who are very anxious and won't leave their house due to their anxiety, who can have moments where they sit back and relax in their chair. So anyway, that imagery is really useless, but also it doesn't help people to realize what an incredible opportunity they have with their mental health. Our mental health is our ability to think and be creative and problem solve and feel all the emotions we feel that make life so worthwhile. It comes from our brain, which to my knowledge is the most complex thing known in the universe to humankind. And it is our unique selling point as a species. So if we can make a toothbrush a sexy product, I'm pretty confident we can do the same for our mental health. And we need to tell that story, because if we don't tell that story, people won't engage in the subject because they won't realize the opportunity. That's the change I think we're seeing. And I'm so excited about it because I think it's our generation's responsibility to make sure that there isn't another person that goes up in the world scared to talk about their mental health, anxious about where to go for support when they get problems. This should be a topic that is as normalized as physical health. So that's how I think the conversation is evolving.
And Laura, what are we seeing at Uber?
Yeah, I think to kind of build on what Nick is saying, this is what we're seeing at Uber, but I believe this my whole HR career, which is, there's a lot of organizations solving the same problems. The one differentiation between these companies is how well they tap into their employees' brains, right? How well they tap into, their employees' ability to creatively problem solve and to do really high quality work, right? Everything else can be the same. We use the same tools, we use computers, right? And so you really have to create that space where people do their best work. And the whole time in HR, people have been asking that question of like, what is the secret to people doing their best work? And a lot of the studies on this keep coming back to creating psychological safety and creating a space where people can be in a learning mindset. And the only way you can be in a learning mindset is you have to feel safe. You have to feel safe to make mistakes and to learn from them, right? You have to be around that you feel like you can learn from. And that is really about mental health, right? And if you think about mental health the way that Nick is talking about it, again, we all have this every day. How can you show up in your best mindset and obsess about the problems your customers have and focus on coming up with really creative solutions to solve those problems? And so in HR, we need to really think through this and think through, okay, if I want to create an environment where people do their best work, what do people need? And it really comes down to really help our teams, our managers, employees as they engage with their peers. How do we help them create that safe space where they can learn, where they can talk about whatever is going on, however they're showing up that day, so that they can then tap into their best mental space and do their best work.
One thing that's really stood out for me as a leader and a manager at Uber is the role that managers are playing. They're really on the front lines, having these conversations, having to see the signals, especially for many in a virtual environment, which makes it that much harder, but then also have the conversation. And if I'm being really honest, balance being, not being someone's therapist, but also being there to listen and to facilitate. And Lauren, I'm curious kind of how you see the evolving role of the manager as it pertains to mental health and how we can support our managers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love psychological safety. It's a term that I've heard a lot more recently. And, something that we do at Lyra, just with each other in terms of teammates is we just, we'll Slack each other, be like, wellness check, how you doing? And it provides like a real honest space to be like, I'm doing great or I'm not doing that great today. And really being able to be safe to really answer honestly. And I think for me, like first, just taking a step back and defining what psychological safety is. I know there's probably lots of definitions, but it's really the belief that you won't be punished or humiliating for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, mistakes. And it's really a shared belief by members of a team and others that they won't be embarrassed or rejected or punished for speaking up. So I think that's just really important because a lot of people maybe might be familiar with what that is on your team. So really level setting and setting that expectation and defining it as a group to really ensure that that's a key value of your group organization as you kind of navigate this new space of mental health. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing I would recommend is really demonstrate empathy. So it's important for managers to really acknowledge that these are really tough times that we're working in. And given the stress of current events and increased responsibilities at home, really letting your team know that you understand and express empathy with these challenges. And you can begin simply by initiating one-on-one conversations, kind of like I mentioned before, either Slack or in person is obviously great too, or video. And to really just let them know like, hey, how are you doing? How is this going? And if they're struggling, really create a plan to support them so they can leave that meeting feeling like there is a plan for them to feel support. And then finally, reminding them that there are resources available. And to Nick's point, maybe even showing vulnerability about how you yourself have used those resources to help you support your own mental health. So they can really understand that it's just not something that you're recommending, but they also know that you're using them as well. So I think those three things of creating psychological safety, demonstrating empathy, and then reminding them of resources are really key ways that managers can support their team.
Michelle, can I possibly throw something in there as well that I think is, because I agree with all the things Lauren said, but I think that there needs to be a change of mindset again about how we're supporting managers. And you often hear this kind of spot signs and symptoms language used around equipping people in the workplace to support others' mental health. And I think that needs to be spoken cautiously, in my opinion. Even as a clinical psychologist, I can't just spot signs and symptoms. We're not creating Jedis here. But I think it is important that we recognize that actually this is a topic that is not going away. In other words, this is an evergreen topic. And if you think back to a TV show you loved, right, and then you watched maybe 6 months ago, and then if somebody sat down and gave you an exam on the plot lines of that TV show, unless you have like an exceptional memory, or if you're like me, like I can't remember. I loved Games of Thrones, but if you ask me the characters' names, I probably couldn't tell you. If you asked me what happened, I probably couldn't tell you. And yet that was a brilliant TV show I was totally obsessed by. And what that speaks to is the fact that if you don't keep something ever present in your life, you actually can't recall it indefinitely. And therefore, I think we need to empower people to understand the topics, and particularly the topics that you're highlighting there, Lauren, which I really agree, to get them to understand it, but then to recognize that we need to continuously be supporting managers around this information. It should not be once a year on a hot Thursday afternoon, you're sitting in a room listening to this topic. It should be perpetual, continuous, evolving, relevant, so that your managers really have the best chance possible to be able to have open conversations, to be able to signpost appropriately, etc. So I think we're going to see a transformation around how managers are supported in mental health in the coming years.
And if we extend this to employees, does the advice change at all? And I'm asking because, as I've dug into kind of resilience, so much of what I've read about is that resilience is very dependent on having a support system. And successful organizations have found that peer-driven support systems often work really well. Is there anything you'd add on to this for how we support our employees to be good peers to each other?
I mean, I think there's a lot of things that we can do. I think coming back to the themes that we pulled out in the conversation so far. Recognize that we are all different. Just because you may not respond in the same way that somebody else you're supporting is responding doesn't mean that they're wrong. They have a whole different set of personalities, living circumstances, lived experience, etc., that will impact on how they might perceive a situation. So try and hear from their perspective. Don't jump to problem solving. I think humans maybe find it hard to actually listen well. We're more inclined to jump to solutions, but actually sometimes just listening is the most appropriate thing that we can do. And I think also, again, keep the conversation active, keep the conversation alive, get your senior leaders to be speaking about it in all hand meetings, get your managers routinely to be checking in at the start of every meeting they have with somebody they support. Just make the conversation alive as part of the day-to-day of the operation, and that will make the organization, because that will be an open and honest conversation around the well-being of people. And don't just do that in relation to mental health problems. Do it in relation to positive mental health as well. Ask people, how are you? If somebody says, I had a great weekend hanging out with my friends or my family, that will impact on their mental health as much as if somebody said, oh, I didn't get any sleep. That will also impact on someone's mental health, but from a negative perspective, let's make sure we remember the whole spectrum of mental health, not just the stuff at the bottom of the end of the spectrum.
And something that I like to personally do is really just check in with my teammates and really understand how they like to be supported. Like as Nick was saying, everyone is so different, and maybe one of my colleagues doesn't like to be recognized for a project we've been working hard on, so a public Slack shout out might make her cringe. And just really understanding like what is best for them and just trying to kind of navigate it like that, because I always like to support people the best way that they like to be supported. And so I think sometimes you have to ask that question, really, like, how can I best support you right now? Or how do you like to be recognized? Or how do you like team members to show up for you? And then meeting them there, I think is just really important. And then also keep checking in, because to Nick's point as well, like that can also be changing as well. Just wanted to check in. Do you still not like public recognition? Happy to just write your manager a note privately, or, whatever the case may be, to really meet them where they are. And I think that really goes a long way.
Yeah, I think the thing I would add to this is be very mindful about the role that being in person with someone versus being remote, being over Zoom, how much that dynamic changes. And so one of the things that we're seeing in our research is, while productivity has gone up, right? It's easier to get things done. You can focus, you can turn off notifications on your computer. Things that are going down are some of the interpersonal interactions you might have if you're sitting in an office with somebody, right? If you go to get coffee and you run into someone that you haven't seen in a while, you're going to stop and you're going to have a conversation with that person. We are social beings. This is how we are designed to operate with one another. And in this new hybrid environment where more people are going to be working outside of the office, you need to come up with what is the digital way of overcoming that distance. And I would say this is true whether you're an organization that has a lot of people working from home. This is also true if you have a very global organization where you have people that are spread around the world. They may be in offices, but they're working with people remotely. How do you build those relationships that, over the thousands of years of evolution, we were meant to have these in-person relationships with people? That is also changing. And so be deliberate at creating that connection, whether you're doing Zoom happy hours, whether you're just checking in with your team on Slack, whether you're just sending an email to someone to say, hey, thinking about you, how is your day? How can you make that human connection happen through these digital tools that we have?
And something that's really stood out for me across what all of you have said is that I think we're all running a million miles an hour most of the time. And it's really about taking a pause, because all of this means that we need to not just jump right into the work, but ask people how they are. And I think that's something that's very top of mind for me. And, if we jump into the next one, this final section about kind of the future of wellness benefits, if we bring everything we've talked about together, the summary for companies is that they have to adapt and they have to provide ways to provide holistic care. It's not just good for employees, it makes good business sense, but people are going to start to demand it. And, Laura, I really want to start with you, because you have mentioned meeting people where they are and just understanding where you are as an organization, but also your employees being a great source of information when organizations are trying to figure out where to start.
Yeah, and again, it goes back to this idea of if you really want to meet someone's needs, you have to deeply understand their needs, and that means having empathy with them. And you could do this in a very structured way. What we do is we always start with, what does the data say, right? And this is very similar to consumer product, right? We have a lot of data, we have a lot of information available to us. If you have an employee survey you do on a regular basis, look at what that data says, look at what those comments say. Talk to your benefit providers. They have data on how are your services being used. You know, we talked about seeing changes in how people were using their mental health benefits. That information is really critical to you because it is telling you, like, what are your people doing? But then you have to add your employee's voice to that. You need to talk to your people. You need to conduct empathy interviews and just ask them, how are things going? What is working well? Where do we have gaps? How can I do a better job of meeting your needs? So start by really understanding all of that information. That can then help you come up with a map to meet those needs. You can start to prioritize what comes first based on, you know, what is the most off in terms of meeting employee needs. And sometimes these are really little things. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're big things, and it's hard as an organization to figure out, like, oh gosh, how do I close that gap? But sometimes it's really simple, right? Employees might say, I feel so overwhelmed because I'm on Zoom all day long. Great. Okay. Let's figure out how we can meet that need, right? I don't think that you could do a good job meeting your employees' needs if you are not checking in with them to understand what those needs are.
And Lauren, you've talked about kind of this new definition of benefits packages, because we really do have to take a step back and reassess like what benefits look like today. Can you share more about that?
Yeah, and I think it's just, to Laura's point, it's so important to have that data, both hard data and then anecdotal data, by listening to your people. Once you have that, you can really make informed decisions around, you know, what type of specific benefits and care is needed. And what we're seeing in the mental health space is a need for more targeted treatment offerings. So with our market and our clinical research is really telling us is there's 3 areas of support for more complex healthcare issues, mental health care issues. So the first one resides around alcohol use disorder. And our new alcohol use disorder with Lyra Reset is a comprehensive treatment program that helps people reduce drinking and obtain sobriety. So that's the first. The second modality is dialectical behavioral therapy for suicidality, which is a specialized program that helps members decrease suicidal thoughts and behaviors. And then third, we know that finding complex care and mental health needs can be among some of the most difficult experiences for people and their families. And it's really just exhaustive. So with our Lyra Concierge, we simplify those complex care needs by finding more mental health complex care support. So that's what we're really seeing in the market. And we are really excited to be able to support these 3 new modalities to our members.
And Nick, I'm going to quote something you've said to us before because I really like it. And I think it pushes the envelope and it encourages companies to do that. You've said that they need to be ambitious. It's bold, but I think it's where we are today. So tell us why.
Well, I mean, I kind of probably fit that classic founder profile of wanting everything to happen yesterday. And I probably apply the same mindset to what I think should happen in the workplace. I think for people who attend HR conferences or workplace wellbeing conferences, we will see the same thing time and time again, spoken on stage, somebody picking the microphone up and say, well, I think senior leadership buy-in is really important. We need to educate our people. We need data. Where is the ROI? Where is the VOI? All of these type of topics. And actually a lot of these things you can do now. You know, let's be bold as organizations. Let's say, you know, we care so much about mental health as an organization. Our executives have to speak about it at every company meeting. We care so much about mental health as an organization that we make it mandatory training for everybody, in every manager or every employee in the organization, to make time every day to look after the mental health, to understand their mental health, to understand how to have conversations about mental health with their colleagues. We as an organization care so much about mental health that we routinely run surveys to understand not only people's mental health, but their perception of the psychological safety, their perception of managers' openness to the conversations around mental health, etc. We run that routinely all the time. We care so much about mental health. We report this at the board meeting, in the board deck, before we talk about the financials. If we care about this topic, now is the time to be changing it. So I think we need to be bold, and I think organizations need to be bold. And I really, really, really hope, to Laura's point earlier about employees thinking, where do they want to work? That employees start saying, I'm not working there because they don't care. I'm not working there because they just say it, but they don't do anything. I want employees to try wherever they're empowered enough to do it because they have the flexibility, they have the choice, they have the control. Those employees to say, I'm only working where people care, because what that will end up doing is forcing even the reluctant organizations, the ones that are slow to the party, to come to the party, because otherwise they'll go bust because they won't get the best people. So that's where I think we need to be driving to. We have a huge amount of work to do as a community of people that care about this topic before we've got it to a place where we can high five. So that's my view.
I love the idea about opening with this topic in board meetings, because I think that makes a statement about the prioritization that's being placed on this. Lauren or Laura, do you see that either in your companies or just in terms of how you advise groups? Like, how do we start with this topic?
Yeah, I'm happy to share, some little things we do. So again, I think it starts with you as a leader modeling the behavior, right? A lot of this conversation is going to be bottoms up, but at the end of the day, is employees are looking up to their leaders to model the behavior norms and what's okay. And that includes people in the C-suite all the way down to, who is the day-to-day leader for a team. And so one of the things I do is my team, we have our weekly meeting on Mondays. We always start with gratitude, right? It's my very first meeting of the week. It is Monday. I get to start with my team. I really enjoy working with my team. We have work to do together and we try to make it fun. But if I start with gratitude, that can then ground us in, okay, what are we grateful for and what is going well? And it also helps set that stage for talking about what isn't going well, right? It becomes that safe place. And so I think you as a leader really need to think through, do you want to create psychological safety in your organization? Do you really want to be open to feedback? Do you really want to hear from your employees what's going well and what's not? If you do, you have to model that with what you do in your behavior.
And I think also too, examining, showing the information around mental health in the boardroom is a great example of maybe even a policy change that you'd want to focus on with the entire strategy around mental health, especially when executive leadership is involved and engaging them in different ways, from, having them review and understand the data, and then really create an action plan of, not just in the next 6 months, but what in the next 5 years we're going to do to really address this. So we're in it for the long game, and really identify what things need to change in the organization and create policy change in order to address those things. So just like financials, just like operations, it needs to kind of come with the same cadence and progression and focus to be able to get these things to change, because if they don't, they're just not going to.
And as we're nearing the end of the hour, I'm actually going to steal a question from the chat on this very topic. If there is a budgetary constraint, as I'm sure a lot of organizations are facing, are there certain benefits that you'd recommend over others? Perhaps, how would you prioritize benefits? What's most crucial?
I can give you my perspective. I just want to call out, I am not a mental health professional. So this is kind of coming through the HR lens, and as somebody that used to be responsible for purchasing benefit programs. And again, I would always go back to listen to your employees and they will tell you what you need. But one of the things that I found when I was the head of HR for a tiny organization, we didn't have a lot of money. But when it was time to kind of put together a benefits program offering, there are EAP programs, so employee assistance plan programs out there. They're all different shapes and sizes. There are some that cater to nonprofit organizations or organizations that are not, that don't have all the money in the world to provide their employees these really rich benefits. The one that we happened to do was even a nonprofit itself, right? And these are an employee assistance program. What I love about them is it is an easy way through one phone call, an employee can get access to support on a wide range of issues, right? So whether that is they need to get financial support, they need to talk to somebody about something happening within their family, they just even need to get help with a medical problem, just making sure that there's a resource there for your employees outside your organization that can give them the support that they need. That would be my preference, like start there.
I'm happy to kind of add to that, and I totally agree with kind of Laura's view. But I think for me, it's there's a huge amount of free resource available around the world, depending on which country you're in, around not only people sharing best practice, what they've done in their organizations, but also organizations that give information away that can be kind of shared with your people. I think that no two organizations have exactly the same well-being strategy or approach, and speaks to Laura's point, they have to be, what you do has to work well for you as an organization. But I think the key thing for me is that there is a strategy, that we see this as a long-term commitment. This isn't like, oh, well, there's a thing on my to-do list, tick, move on. This is a multi-year evergreen strategy that you need to be investing in. And so you can start small if you don't have the budget, but you'll soon be able to demonstrate the value from your culture you're creating about people's sense of psychological safety, etc., that will make a really good case for a budget that will then allow you to move to the next step and the next step and the next step. But definitely strategy and right for your organization and multi-year.
And I think just kind of what we're doing here today is conversations are free. So really aligning with those conversations and continuing, psychological safety is free, empathy is free. So I think those are all really exciting things that anyone inside the company, from executive leadership to individual contributors, can really take on and focus on those things to really help guide wherever you are in your mental health journey as an organization, to really use them as guiding principles to affect and start change.
That's great. I love that conversations are free. I think that's important for us all to remember. Oops, went a little too far. So just as we summarize, you can see on the screen some of the main takeaways, but I've actually been taking notes throughout this, and I want to refer to some of my notes and just pull out some of the key quotes that I think really stood out for me, and are helpful as we think about kind of this topic of mental health and how organizations can tackle it. And we really started the conversation talking about how we can't separate the personal from the professional. I think, Laura, you were talking about this, but we should embrace it. And whether we have kids walking around in the background or boxes all over our houses because we're about to move, there is no longer kind of that separation between work and life. And Nick, you really talked about something that I think is so important, which is every moment we're alive is mental health. This is an evergreen topic. It's something we have to own and practice every day, and we have to do it around positive mental health as well. And as we've been doing this, I think we've seen an openness, a destigmatization around the topic, but just an openness to talking about it. Going back to what you just said, Lauren, conversations are free. It's a place to start. We need our senior leaders to be speaking openly and modeling this behavior, from employees to managers to the CEO of our companies. This is something that we have to really embrace every day. And I think a lot of organizations are likely asking themselves, especially after this conversation, where do they start? It was one of the final questions in our chat. And Laura, you talked about how our employees are such an important source of information. We have to deeply understand their needs. And that really just starts by asking. And from there, we can start to have the conversation and creating the packages that will offer the benefits they need. But Nick, I'll summarize with something you said, which is that organizations need to be bold when they're tackling this topic. And finally, I want to share what I am grateful for, because we talked about gratitude, and it is such a positive part of our mental health. And I am very grateful for having open conversations on this topic, that we can have a webinar like this. I feel grateful that this is part of my job, something I get to do, that I've met Lauren and Laura and Nick, and these are the people I get to interact with and learn from. So I hope everyone on this webinar feels equally grateful and had very similar takeaways. Thank you again to all of our panelists. I think we addressed all of the questions kind of in our queue here. And so with that, we will wrap it up. Thank you again to everyone who joined us. And I hope everyone has a great day.